a certain amount of depth here, because there must be a vertical axis on which it rotates, and the stability of the mass would indicate that there must be some depth, or wobble could very easily occur, and we know that there is none.
It's a commonly held misconception that the Earth is a spherical object that revolves around the Sun. But the fact is, of course, that the Earth is a circular dish surrounded by a barrier of ice that explorers like Andrea Barnes have been attempting to penetrate for centuries. And we've constantly turned to the sky for answers. By unlocking the keys to the stars, the Sun and the Moon, it was reasoned, we would learn more about the Earth. So we've remained ever vigilant, turning both our persistence and our technology to the task at hand. But the conclusions have not always been particularly well thought out. 2,000 years ago, an Egyptian scholar by the name of Eratosthenes performed an experiment that he claimed proved the Earth to be a sphere. However, there are serious doubts about the accuracy of his data and his scientific procedures. Dr. Leo Ferrari explains.
Oh, the Eratosthenes experiment is an experiment supposedly conducted in the 1st century, whereby this ingenious person was supposed to have proved, I say that in quotes, that the Earth was a sphere of some 4,000 miles radius. Eratosthenes one day noticed that the Sun was directly overhead in Syene, whereas he noticed that on the same day, at the same time, the Sun made an angle of 7.2 degrees to the vertical at Alexandria, which was some 530 miles away. How did Eratosthenes in the 1st century know what the Sun was doing on the same day in two places which are 530 miles apart? One can take all those same data, knowing that the Earth is flat. In one place you have the Sun directly overhead, and at another place, at the same time, at 530 miles away, let us suppose that it does make an angle of 7.2 degrees to the vertical. Then we have a right-angled triangle, which it can be easily shown that the Sun is some 4,000 miles up in the sky. These superficial, even, considerations show that it's impossible. The whole thing, it's a story, a fairy story made up and mindlessly repeated in textbooks.
In 1543, the Polish astronomer Copernicus suggested the bizarre notion that the Earth is a round ball that circles the Sun. But his book emphasized it was only a hypothesis. He further avoided controversy by withholding the book for 13 years, and then by dying on the day it was published. The theory found its way into the schools, which were then largely controlled by the church. It has remained there to this day, and many children have accepted it without question.
Proofs right around you that show that the Earth is flat. A very simple one to think of is that we use plumb bobs to build buildings. In other words, to get the wall of a building going straight down, you'll take a string with a heavy weight hanging from it, and you make the building follow that string. That plumb bob will point to the center of a round Earth. That means that if you imagine that this was the correct Earth, you can imagine a plumb bob held here would point in that direction, and a plumb bob held here would point in that direction. That means the buildings would be bigger on the top than at the bottom.
When we consider that so eminent an authority as Einstein postulated and indeed proved that light rays bend perceptibly in gravitational fields, it should not be surprising that the light rays from the lower parts of the ship do not succeed in reaching the shore, are incapable of entering the eye of an observer, and so the particular part of the ship from which those light rays come is not seen.
Most significant experiments were those carried out on a canal known as the Old Bedford Level. Located in Cambridgeshire, England, the canal is perfectly straight over an uninterrupted 6-mile stretch. While there, Parallax conducted many experiments, all towards one conclusion: to prove that the surface of the water in the canal was indeed perfectly flat. In one experiment, a boat carrying a flag rowed from one bridge to another 6 miles away. An observer with a telescope placed 8 inches above the surface of the water found that the flag and the boat were distinctly visible throughout the entire distance. If the Earth is a sphere with a circumference of 25,000 miles, then over a distance of 6 miles, the second bridge should mathematically be 16 feet below the observer's eye line. But in spite of the mathematical evidence, any further attempts to restore belief in the flat Earth seem doomed by one of the supposed great moments in modern scientific achievement. At last, after thousands of years of uncertainty, man was able to get far enough away from the Earth to have a good look at it in all its resplendent beauty. It did appear curved, and photographs were brought back for all to see. However, according to experts, these photographs are much less conclusive than one might think.
Einstein told us that light actually is attracted by gravity. In other words, the path of light is not straight in a strong gravitational field. So astronauts looking at the Earth see a curved Earth. But what they don't realize is that it's not the Earth that's curved, it's the light taking a curved path from the Earth because of the strong gravitational field of the Earth that makes the Earth look curved.
So you're saying that those photographs from space that the Apollo mission brought back don't represent the Earth as it really is?
Of course they represent the Earth as it really is, as seen by curved light. And so those photographs from space are entirely correct. And it's just that what has to be taken into account when we take data from those photographs is that light traveling through space is curved by gravity. And so it'll make straight things appear curved. And you know, it'll also make curved things appear straight. So you have to be very careful when you use light to measure things in a very high gravitational field. And outside a window of a car, which is going even at 80 kilometers per hour, a terrific wind goes blasting by and pushes your hand back. Imagine putting your hand outside the window of a car that's going 1,600 kilometers per hour. It would just take your hand right off.
With a sphere of 4,000 miles radius being spun round once every 24 hours, a little bit of calculations will show that that person there is being spun round at about 1,000 miles an hour and it doesn't know it. I mean, this is obvious nonsense. You go on a merry-go-round and it goes, I doubt, more than 10 miles an hour and you get off all dizzy. You mean to tell me that people can be spun round at approximately 1,000 miles an hour and not know it? Why, if this is so, this whole room that we're in is supposedly being spun round at something of approximately that order of speed, and we don't know it.
There's all kinds of evidence for the phenomenon of what's called continental drift. This means that the continents are able to move as if they're floating on a fluid. Now, if the Earth is spherical, if it's spinning, anybody knows that if this is spinning very, very, very fast like that, that the continents should all be located at the equator, because centrifugal force would move the continents from the poles to the middle. One of the real big problems that maybe is a little bit easier to understand, sound doesn't travel nearly that fast. So, for example, if you're at the equator and you wanted to shout to warn somebody, it's quite possible they could never hear you, because if you're shouting, say the Earth was spinning in this direction, and you're shouting in that direction, the sound could never catch up to the person who's, of course, being carried away. But now, an interesting thing happens at the ends of the Earth. You see, when you go on a car trip from point A to point B, you're moving through what's called space. And it takes time to get through space. But if there is space, there must also be non-space. It's kind of like saying, if there's wet, there must be dry. You can't have one without the other. It's obvious. So when you get the end of the pizza model of the Earth, you're actually moving from space into non-space. Now you can move through non-space in no time. See, it takes time to move through space, but it takes no time to move through non-space. So a lot of things are affected by this. For example, satellites, as they cross the Earth, they will then go into this non-space region. They will instantly then be able to reappear back where they started by taking a non-space route. The moon does this, the sun does this, and stars even do this at a very, very slow rate. moving from space into non-space, and then reappearing back where they started from. This is due to a property of reflectivity and complementarity that is a well-known phenomenon.